Hi there, this is Judith O'Day from George Romero's original Night of the Living Dead. And you're listening to Then Is Now podcast.
Warning, warning!
Today's episode contains spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie or TV show that we are talking about, we highly recommend that you watch it first, then listen to this episode. Thank you.
Rise and shine, my sinners. When Father Evil starts his day, he gets a little deadly. Deadly Grounds coffee has the richest, smoothest flavor you'll find anywhere. It's sinfully delicious. Once you go deadly, you never go back. Order yours at getdeadly.com. Coffee's so good, it's scary.
Welcome to 13 Days of Hallowtober.
Hello and welcome to Then Is Now podcast's yearly 13 Days of Hallowtober event. I'm your host, Re-Gor. Today, I'm once again joined by John Grace, host of Midnight Movie Cowboys. John joined my co-host Patsy and I on a two-part episode of my other show, The East Meets the West, where we delve deep into the Shaw Brothers Company and spaghetti westerns as a whole. He was also with me on an episode of last year's 13 Days, where the topic was zombies, and we covered the Hong Kong film Kung Fu Zombies. Glad you could be with me today, John.
Hey, great to be here. Always fun to come back.
Awesome. So, John, can you just quickly refresh our listeners about your show?
I am a co-host of the Midnight Movie Cowboys, which is hosted by an Australian, a Texan, and a Coloradan. I'm the Coloradan. And we just cover all sorts of movies, mainstream, drive-in level, cult movies, foreign films, every type of film there is. Sometimes we cover true crime. Yeah, just anything. We have interesting guests. It's a pretty bizarre show. There's a lot of comedy, a lot of offensive comedy.
Oh, yeah. It's great fun. I totally recommend that people should check it out when they get a chance. It's on all the podcasting apps, I assume?
Yeah, we just started on YouTube about half a year ago and have surprisingly seen our audience grow. I wasn't really big on the YouTube thing because I thought it would hurt the theater of the mind effect of the show, because we have some oddball guests every now and then that people didn't know if they were real people or not. But it's actually worked out very well for us. We've gotten some great numbers, particularly when we cover kung fu films, which I guess is sort of my specialty.
Excellent. Well, that comes in handy because today, as I mentioned, we're continuing our yearly event called 13 Days of Hallowtober, and our theme this year is vampire movies. And today, John and I are going to discuss the Hong Kong film Mr. Vampire from 1985. So sit back and prepare to listen to our discussion of a fun Chinese vampire picture. Class is in session.
Something old. Something red. Something's coming. Something dead. The creepy classic that spawned the hit horror series. Martial arts meets monster mayhem. Four stars. Moon Lee, Ricky Hoy, Lam Ching Ying. The undead are becoming a real pain in the neck. Mr. Vampire. Now risen on video cassette.
In Republic-era China, Master Cao makes a living as a Taoist priest who performs magic that maintains control over spirits and irresponsible vampires. Together with his inept students, Man Choi and Chao Sang, he resides in a large house protected from the spiritual world with talismans and amulets. One day, he accepts an assignment from a wealthy businessman, Yam, to remove Yam's deceased father from his grave and rebury him, with the hopes that doing so will bring more prosperity to the Yam family. However, during the raising of the coffin, Cao notices the body, instead of in a decomposed state, is still intact. Knowing it has become a vampire, he has it moved to his house for further study, which is a brilliant idea. Once in the house, Choi and Sang line the coffin with enchanted ink to safeguard the body, but they forget to line the bottom of the coffin, causing the vampire to break out. It heads straight for Yam's home and savagely kills his son before going into hiding by dawn. Why, an incompetent police inspector who is smitten with Yam's daughter Ting, blames Cao for murdering Yam and arrests him. Cao is imprisoned and Yam's body is placed in a makeshift morgue near the jailhouse. Choi stays at Yam's house to protect Ting, while Sang frees his master, only to witness Yam reawakening as a vampire. Cao and Sang manage to kill it after engaging it in battle. Wai realizes his mistake in framing Cao earlier and accepts the fact that another vampire is on the loose. The vampire again invades Yam's house. Cao and Sang arrive in time to wound it and forcing it to flee, but not before it critically wounds Choi. Cao invites Ting to stay at his house for safety. The next morning, after examining Choi's wounds, Cao claims he too may become a vampire. He orders Sang to feed Choi glutinous rice, claiming it may decrease the vampire's venom in Choi's body and bring him back to his normal state. While purchasing the rice, however, the shady merchant deliberately mixes different kinds of rice in the bag, and an unwitting Sang accepts it. Before Sang can get home, he's lured by a mysterious woman into her house. He soon deduces she's a spirit, but she uses her supernatural power to seduce him, and they sleep together for the night. When Sang returns to Cao's house, the priest is quick to notice his student's predicament. That night, he silently follows Sang to the spirit's house. The spirit transforms into a hideous ghoul and attempts to kill Cao, but fails at the hands of his talismans. She bewitches Sang to turn on his master, but after a brief fight, Cao breaks the spell and she escapes. The next night, Cao ties Sang to a chair and prepares to capture and eliminate the spirit. Sure enough, she arrives at their house and Cao chases her throughout. As Sang tries to free himself, Choi turns into a vampire and attacks him. Amidst the chaos, Cao restrains Choi and almost terminates the spirit, but stops when Sang begs him to let her go. Saddened she can no longer be with Sang, the spirit flies away. Over the next few days, Cao restores Choi's health and turns him back to human. Wai brings in news that the vampire is now active again. When Cao leaves to investigate, the vampire, now in an almost demonic form, invades Cao's place. After pushing Choi off a balcony, it turns its attentions to Ting and Wai, but Cao and Sang again divert its attention. Finally, Cao's fellow Taoist priest, Four Eyes, shows up by coincidence, and they manage to destroy the vampire by burning it alive. So, John, when did you first see this film, and what was your first impression?
I first saw it in, I believe, 1989. I got a hold of one of those copies of a Chinatown videotape rental, because we used to have 2 or 3 companies in America that would sell these films only to Chinatown video stores, which was a big market. And it had subtitles. The quality was fairly bad, particularly by today's standards. It was, I loved it. I had already heard it was a classic, and I'm not of the opinion that horror and comedy are a very good combination, because other than Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, there are not a lot of them I like. And I was blown away by this because it had some horror, which it's not the same type of horror that was real big in the 80s, I guess, but it was sort of like Ghostbusters, I suppose. It had martial arts action. It had the comedy. The comedy was actually very funny. If you've seen a good number of Chinese comedies, sometimes the humor doesn't translate well to Americans, but in this case, it actually translates pretty well. I mean, they kept it very slapstick oriented, and also the gimmick of the Chinese vampires was pretty new, and their vampire mythology is very different from ours, and it's more based on Taoism instead of Christianity. So it was a very unique viewing experience, and I probably watched that tape 10 times, and eventually when I got a subtitled Laserdisc version, watched that a bunch of times, and then I've gone through at least 3 or 4 different DVD editions. So it has that high status of a film I probably recollected on different video releases more than any other.
That's awesome. And I think when we were talking off mic, you said it's on Blu-ray, right?
Yeah, I just got a Blu-ray came out in China a couple of years ago. Was said to look pretty good, but I waited on this British Blu-ray that came out from Eureka, and I don't think they've made an American edition, which is unfortunate. I wish they would. Americans really should see this stuff. I think horror fans in North America would love it. But the Eureka Blu-ray was based on a new, I believe, 2K scan from the negative. Looks amazing. I didn't think the film was capable of looking like this, because 20th Century Fox released a DVD in the early 00s in America, and it did not look very good. And a lot of that Golden Harvest stuff has never really looked it's never looked more than mediocre on DVD. And I think it's because of the photography or whatever. But I'm sure there's various technical reasons. But this Blu-ray is gorgeous. I looked at it yesterday for the first time, and I was kind of blown away.
Yeah, that's true. And, I agree with your assessment on the comedy as well. And it's in my notes that the comedy held up well. A lot of times foreign comedy doesn't necessarily translate well to other countries. But I saw this in the 90s, similar to you. I grew up north of Boston, and my buddy and I would go into Harvard Square, and there was a shop in there that would sell bootleg VHS tapes of Hong Kong cinema, and we'd collect them. And my buddy bought this one, and we watched it, and I loved it. I remember really enjoying it, and it was just one of those things that over the years it kind of got away from me, and it wasn't until I don't know, about a year or two ago, a friend of mine got me a digital copy of it, and so I watched it in preparation for this, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful print. And yeah, this movie is just one of those ones that sticks with you. It's so good. And so would you say this was one of the first ones, I think you might have said this, to present sort of the Chinese vampire in movies?
It's not the first to present them, because they would often, I keep discovering that they were in these different films in the 70s and maybe even the 60s, but they were kind of like I don't know, it's not really a subplot. They were more like a visual peripheral thing in the film. They weren't the main point of the Gyonzi scene, I think is how they pronounce it, or Gyonshi or whatever. And you would see them in different movies. I think maybe the Shaolin Invincibles had a scene with the Gyonzi. I'm not 100%. Maybe the Spiritual Boxer. I haven't seen these in a while. But this was the first one to really exploit it and say, hey, this is the Chinese vampire movie. And it was quite a sensation at the box office in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and I think it must have done well in Japan, because there was just a slew of knockoffs and imitations. So it really created that Chinese vampire wave of films in a way that Sammo Hung's earlier film Encounters of the Spooky Kind did not, and that probably kicked off the Hong Kong horror boom. But Mr. Vampire really solidified the Chinese vampire thing, because there's more. I'm still discovering imitations of Mr. Vampire, digging up old videos of different Hong Kong films and Taiwanese movies.
Right. And we're going to actually talk about another film on a separate show that sort of ripped this film off, among others. So let's just dive into the cast and crew a little bit here. So it was directed by Ricky Lau. What can you tell us about Ricky Lau?
He was somebody who worked with Sammo Hung's company. I think it's Bojan. I forget what the credit is, like Bojan Films, because there were different with similar names. Look at his history. It's funny. He wasn't like, he directed Two Toothless Tigers, which is like an adequate movie, I think made for Garbo Films with Sammo, and it says a Shun Yi Yun in it, which I don't remember liking the film all that much. But obviously he had a affinity for comedy, and he could do the slapstick action, and that's probably what counted at Sammo's company. And his career is odd, because you would think, I mean, he did do Where's Officer Tuba, but other than Mr. Vampire movies and Encounters of the Spooky Kind 2, which is a very good film that Warner Brothers is currently sitting on, by the way, we might get into that later. But other than that, he did not have this extensive career that I thought he would have had making a film like this. And sometimes I wonder if these guys just get overworked from it, but he mainly did all the Mr. Vampire sequels, and he did some of the knockoffs. He even did Spooky Family 2. And I don't think he directed the first Spooky Family. So it's an interesting if a somewhat erratic career, I guess, or scattershot career.
That's
And
interesting.
apparently he made a movie last year called Taoist Priest, which I'm just finding this out now.
Oh, wow.
How odd.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so maybe they were trying to bring that. Looks like they were trying to bring the Mr. Vampire thing back. Like, kind of like how we are with the Western or certain types of nostalgia films. There's always an attempt to bring a certain subgenre back and doesn't always succeed. I guess Exorcist films kind of made a comeback a few years ago because I noticed there were several exorcism movies out. Or
Right.
haunted house movies.
Yeah.
And here it looks like they've every now and then they try to revive the Mr. Vampire thing. And sometimes I wonder if it's because this film was not released in mainland China in the 80s, as far as I know. People forget these are Hong Kong movies, which means they played Hong Kong, they played Taiwan, maybe they played South Korea, and this was a hit in South Korea. And sometimes they, if they were lucky, they got a release in Japan, but they did not play mainland China. Like, in fact, China didn't see Bruce Lee films until the 90s, I believe.
Wow.
At least in a large format. So I think what they're trying to do, because they have these new viewers in China who have maybe some interest in old Hong Kong movies. There's a few. They try to capitalize, say, hey, can we make Mr. Vampire work for the mainland Chinese? Because got all these movie theaters and it needs product and Chinese-based product. But I think one issue with that is supposedly, and I don't know how true it really is, Beijing has a censorship issue with movies portraying the supernatural. So I don't know if they work a way around that. When I see this Taoist Priest movie, I'll kind of get it. But this was filmed in China that I'm looking at right now. This movie I just learned about.
Yeah, I'll have to add that to my list too. I got to check that out.
Yeah,
well.
I'm gonna have to hunt it down. It's since they closed my local Chinese bootleg shop.
Yeah.
Down in Federal's Little Saigon area. I'm kind of I have to hunt these things a bit harder.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you mentioned Sammo Hung, and I believe he produced this film, correct?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Sammo was having quite a production boom in the 80s, and a really good track record as a director as well, or at least what he's credited with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what explains why this film is so good, is because he was behind it in some capacity, you know?
Yeah, and I didn't realize it ran over budget.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Ricky Lau said, he goes, it ran over budget. It ended up costing twice as much as what they budgeted for, which was like, it was supposed to be like a Hong Kong $4 million. Which is like 200 grand US or something silly like that. But he said it ended up costing like over 8 million Hong Kong dollars, and they filmed it supposedly in 2 weeks.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
they work 12 hours a day, and they have their shots planned, and that stunt work has to be pulled off right away, or you can end up with injured stuntmen. And and this does have some really eye-popping stunts, and also they're shooting without sound, so they don't have to worry about doing multiple takes of dialogue.
Right. That's true. And you mentioned Ricky Lau. He's one of the writers credited on this film.
Yeah, this actually unusual for a Hong Kong movie. It has multiple writers, and I noticed Barry Wong is one of the contributors. Barry Wong probably contributed to every major film of the Hong Kong New Wave. I think his final work was maybe Hard Boiled, the John Woo movie, which I believe was dedicated to him. I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me. But Barry Wong wrote, I believe, a lot of Jackie Chan's popular films, most of John Woo's movies. He did a lot of work. I think some Stephen Chow films as well. Very prolific, very dependable screenwriter. And there's other credited writers, and in an interview with Ricky Lau that's on the Eureka Blu-ray that I believe was ported over from the Hong Kong Legends DVD out of England, he said there was a lot of writers working on this. Like Eric Chang contributed scenes and jokes, and they kind of worked as a committee. But unlike the way it's done in Hollywood, where it's almost like screenwriters are trying to basically eradicate the previous writer's work so they can get their name on the script instead of the previous guy. Here they kind of collaborate to help to make the best movie possible instead of, hey, I'm going to replace this scene you did with this scene that makes no sense because I want a credit on this film. They don't have that attitude. There's uncredited writers on this film, and I know that Ricky Lau said Eric Chang helped out with the script as well.
Wow. Oh, that's cool. So let's dive into the cast a little bit here, and I'm going to go through the cast, and then you can come back and tell me about the different actors. So we've got Lam Ching Ying, who played Master Kao. He's the unibrowed priest that specialized in the Taoist supernatural arts. Ricky Hui plays Man Choi, which He's one of Kao's students, and in the version I watched, I don't know if it was the same for you, the subtitle said his name was Dan, which I thought was interesting.
No, I don't believe mine said that, but I didn't watch the subtitle.
Well, because then we also had Chin Soo Ho as Chow Sang, and he came up as Harry on the subtitles.
Must have been an Australian video print. Sounds like something they'd do.
Maybe. Moon Lee played Ting Sing, who is Master Yam's daughter. Huang Ha played Master Yam. He's a rich man. He's apparently killed by the vampire that comes back from the dead to be like his late father. Anthony Chan is on board as Priest Four Eyes. He uses magic to control the hopping corpses and transport them to their hometowns for burial. Pauline Wong Shu-feng played Jade, who was the female ghost. Billy Lau played Y, who was the cowardly police inspector. And Yuan Hua was one of the hopping corpses. So tell us a little bit about, do you know anything about Lam Xing Ying?
Yeah, he was, he started out, I believe, as he was Bruce Lee's choreography assistant in his original films in the early 70s. And he was an experienced guy at the Golden Harvest stunt crew and ended up doing a lot of acting much later on. If you watch Enter the Dragon, which might be the best known film of that Bruce Lee era, Lam Ching Ying is doubling for Shek Kin when Mr. Lee is fighting Mr. Han in the finale. That's actually Lam Ching Ying doubling for Shek Kin. Shek Kin was too old to be taking these bumps and bruises from Bruce Lee's fight choreography. So if you look closely in slow-mo, you'll see it's Lam Ching Ying playing Han. And it's funny because he did a lot of bit parts. You'll always see him as henchman, and he doubles for people. He's a very skilled fighter, very skilled action guy. And there's a lot of different roles. And then he sort of had a breakthrough with, he had some comedic bit parts before this, but he had a breakthrough in Sammo Hung's film in 1981, The Prodigal Son, where he gave this amazing performance as a Wing Chun teacher. And it's still regarded as the best Wing Chun movie ever made. I don't think the Ip Man movies are even close. They're not in the same ballpark.
Wow. And
part of the reason that works is his performance is so endearing. It's a terrific performance. It's some very good acting. Everybody says these films don't have good acting. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. And then he got major roles after that. He started playing bigger roles, especially in like The Dead and the Deadly, and he's in Encounters of the Spooky Kind as the inspector. But Mr. Vampire kind of made him a superstar, like an identifiable star. And because he became nicknamed the One Eyebrow Priest, and he was able to recycle this role in so many different films and kind of extended his career in a good way. He didn't have to worry about doing stunt work all the time. But you will see him in various Golden Harvest action films of the 80s and 90s, and films with Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung and their different actors. He even he did a movie, a tribute to Mr. Vampire. He did a film called Crazy Safari, which co-starred. It was portions of it were filmed in Africa, and it was written by Barry Wong. And the funny thing is, it co-stars Lam Ching Ying and that actor, the Bushman from The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Oh, wow.
Nigzao, or whatever his name is. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Which, it's a worthwhile film to hunt down.
What's the name of it again?
Crazy Safari.
Crazy Safari. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to have to.
Crazy Safari. In the film, this Nigzao guy is being chased by rival Bushmen. So Lam Ching Ying gives him a Taoist spell to turn him into Bruce Lee, where he becomes possessed by Bruce Lee. And there's a scene where Nigzao is doing Bruce Lee. I mean, it's obviously a stunt double, doing Bruce Lee moves on different Bushmen, and then he's doing the facial expressions and the nose wiping with the thumb and everything, and lecturing the people he just beat up. So it's pretty hilarious.
That's funny. So we mentioned Ricky Hui, who played Man Choi, or Choi, or Dan, whatever you prefer. I liked his performance here. I thought he played the comedy well, although I felt like he looked a little old for what he was playing. I got the impression he was supposed to be like in his 20s, and he looked like he was closer to 40. But I would have actually liked to have seen Chiang Sheng play that part. He would have been awesome in that role.
Yeah, Ricky Hoy was part of the Hoy brothers team of the 70s, a comedy and music team that was, they had a TV show, and they did some films for Golden Harvest that were the biggest hits in Golden Harvest history and the highest grossing Hong Kong movies of all time. Every time they were released, the Hoy brothers would put out a new film, and it would be the record breaking Hong Kong movie release. Michael Hui usually wrote and directed them. He was in Cannonball Run with Jackie Chan.
Oh yeah.
Sam Hui, who later broke off on his own and did the Aces Go Places movies at Cinema City, a rival studio, was a very popular singer, probably the most popular, who was sort of like an Elvis of Hong Kong. He's considered the father of Canto Pop because he pretty much invented singing pop music in Cantonese. Because apparently it was considered a tough language to, I guess, to do pop music based on Cantonese lyrics. And so he was a superstar, and he was handsome. So some people have compared it to be like, okay, Michael Hui was Jerry Lewis, and Sammy was Dean Martin. Sam Hui would be the Dean Martin. And then they brought in their brother Ricky, who at the time could only do cameos in the first two films because he still had a contract at Shaw Brothers. But they did a Hong Kong TV show where they did sketch comedy, and Ricky was a big part of that. Now, the thing about Ricky, of course, was he was not handsome like Sam, and he was a bit, but it's funny because he had kind of like the Beatle haircut or whatever, but
Yeah.
he didn't look like Michael, and he had a different type of comedy than Michael. He was more of a slapstick, pathetic type of, it's hard to think of. More like a, would it be a Lou Costello type? I don't know. I can't think of an immediate comparison. I hate making that type of comparison. Hey, he's like Burt Reynolds. He's like Sammy Davis. But
he reminded me of Red Skelton.
Yeah, it's that type of comedy slapstick. It's a bit different, and he's a little deadpan a lot. He has kind of a deadpan expression on his face a lot, which is part of so I guess he's a combo of the straight man and the funny man. But Ricky, when he was able to be freed of his Shaw Brothers contract, he goes over to Golden Harvest, and not only does he play major roles in the Hoy Brothers comedies like The Private Eyes, he ends up starring in his own comedies at Golden Harvest. Like I think one was called Money Crazy, and it was directed by John Woo, and is actually a very funny film. It's worth seeking out. I think it's one of the John Woo movies that has aged really well, because I don't think a lot of his films have aged well. But the comedy is so fast and perfect. It's like John Woo, I think, had a better knack for comedy than action, of all things. But Ricky was sort of a comedy star of his own, and so when he co-starred in this, I think he was already considered a comedy superstar. And I think he was considered the box office draw at one point, because the final Hui Brothers film of the Golden Harvest contract was Security Unlimited, and Security Unlimited, he is pretty much the star. Sammy was about to jump to Cinema City, and his role is a supporting role. Michael's part isn't even as big as Ricky's. It's kind of interesting. It's like Ricky Hoy's movie.
Huh.
And so Ricky was kind of the staple comedy guy at Golden Harvest in the 80s.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea. That's awesome.
Yeah, or comedy relief, I guess. I wouldn't say he's a superstar, but having him in the film helped it quite a bit. He's a big pop culture icon there.
Wow. Well, I could see why they put him in this role then, because it's bankable,
Right. And plus the audience thinks he's funny. The Chinese audience, you go see a Chinese comedy back in the day when they had the Chinatown movie theaters. You go see a Cantonese comedy, and the audience in there is laughing at stuff you don't even pick up on.
Yeah.
Like I went to see some Stephen Chow movies there. They were cracking up at stuff I didn't know what the hell they were cracking up at, because it turns out there's things in Cantonese slang, and there's subtle humor that a Westerner is not going to catch unless we're Cantonese fluent and we know the lingo of Hong Kong. And it's just kind of it was a little over my head, but they were cracking up. They just acted like they were dying of laughter.
That's hilarious. So what about some of the other casts? Is there anything you want to mention? I know there's Chin Soo Ho and Billy Lau.
Chin Soo Ho is started out at Shaw Brothers as sort of an action star. Goes over to Golden Harvest, very talented man, acrobat, can fight like you wouldn't believe. You see him in some movies like Blonde Fury with Cynthia Rothrock. He's amazing in that film. Later in the 90s, kind of spent his time as the Jet Li's fellow student who betrays him or goes bad, because I guess he could keep up with Jet Li's fight choreography pretty easily and Jet Li's various fight doubles. And he's a very talented martial artist and actor, and kind of the leading man you always thought should have been a way bigger star, but was not, and for whatever reason that happens, who knows why.
Right, right.
Maybe if he came on 5 years earlier, he might have had a healthier career, because he kind of came in as a traditional kung fu film was dying off, and that was really his skill. But he's always interesting to watch in any film.
Right, right. He was good in this. I really liked him in this.
Yeah.
And now Billy Lau is a name that's familiar to me. What can you tell me about him?
Billy Lau. Let me look at this, because I got to refamiliarize myself with these guys. Can't really tell you much about him. I believe he is a comedy co-star. So I'm looking at this, and he kind of makes cameos as a geeky character that harasses people or whatever.
Yeah.
Or he's troublemaker, the authority figure that gets pranked, that sort of thing. Moon Lee had a very vibrant career in that decade. And the funny thing is, when she retired from showbiz about 20 years ago, or maybe a little longer, she settled in Denver, Colorado, and I believe may still live here.
Oh, wow.
I have never encountered her here, but she did marry a local doctor who was very, very famous in the Denver area, and then they had an ugly divorce. But she is supposedly still in Denver, or the Denver area, teaching dance, but I do not know where.
Oh,
but she, what I understand, she's sometimes has an active Facebook account. She writes in English, and she says sometimes she encounters fans in Denver who recognize her. So she always cracks it. Yunhua, who played the vampire. Yunhua, if you watch Enter the Dragon, you will see Bruce Lee's character do flips, like he does a backflip on Bob Wall and kicks him in the head, and does a backflip at the beginning fighting with Sammo Hung. That's actually Yunhua. Yunhua was the acrobat double for Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, and that's what he, because his specialty was flipping. And I often suspect he is, if you see the movie Inframan, I suspect Yunhua is one of the Inframan guys in the suit doing the flips and the kicks.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Because Inframan's movements are movements that Yunhua specializes in, because he's an amazing acrobat and fighter. And he did more acting in the late 70s up to the 80s and 90s, where he played a villain in Eastern Condors and Dragons Forever. And he's just incredible in those films. Fights like a devil, man. And also, he's if you see the movie Kung Fu Hustle, the Stephen Chow film, Chow gives a lot of the comedy to Yunhua, because Yunhua plays the husband in this old couple that's gets into. I mean, they take up half the film as the stars of the film,
right?
And Yunhua is just spectacular. He's a terrific actor and incredible martial artist. He's actually one of my favorite of those old Hong Kong character actors who could do it all.
Oh, that's cool. I saw that in the theater when it came out, like 20 years ago, something like that?
Yeah. You'll remember Yunhua did Sleeping Kung Fu.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about the rest of the cast?
Well, I'm looking at the cast list, and Wu Ma is in the film. Wu Ma played the singing Taoist priest in A Chinese Ghost Story in that trilogy of films, and has also directed quite a few films since the 70s. Nobody else really jumps out at me as a big deal to talk about, but I think we've given enough info on the cast here to help people out with their first viewing. Exactly.
So I just want to give a little background on, as you mentioned, John, the Shang-Chi, which is the Chinese version of the vampire. They're hopping vampires. They're these reanimated corpses in Chinese legends and folklore. It's, I guess in Cantonese, it's Gengshi.
Yeah. I've also heard Gyonshi is sometimes it sounds like they say Gyonshi. It's hard to say, because the thing about Chinese terms is almost like 4 or 5 accurate ways to pronounce the words.
Right. We found that out the hard way on The East Meets the West. But basically, these creatures are typically depicted as, like, they're stiff because they've got rigor mortis. They're dressed in a Chinese shroud, which is, I guess it can be mistaken as official garments from the Qing dynasty. And but they walk. Well, they don't walk. They have their arms outstretched because of the rigor mortis, and they can only hop because of the rigor mortis. Right. And usually, instead of drinking blood, they'll absorb the life force. Although in this movie, there was a lot of biting going on here.
Yeah. I know that Sammo was a big fan of Hammer films,
Oh, okay.
And I know that he was trying to get Christopher Lee to appear in Encounters of the Spooky Kind,
Oh, wow.
but I suspect Golden Harvest didn't want to spend the money to get Christopher Lee in the film. But I know that he had requested possibly getting Christopher Lee's participation. So Samo, I think, kind of puts in the gives you a little of the Hammer vampire vibe because he likes those movies.
Yeah, you can kind
And
of
it's
see that now that
expected.
you
If you
mention
say
it.
Mr. Vampire, you want blood sucking. That's how it is.
Right, right. Yeah, you could kind of see that influence in this movie. I hadn't thought about it, but now that you mention it, yeah, it makes total sense. Some of the methods they use, I'm not going to go over every single method that I found a shit ton online, but the ones that were used in the movie here, for example, they have sort of this octagonal mirror that
Right.
basically, they're terrified of their own reflections, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, again, it's not like the Slavic vampires where they supposedly have no reflection.
Right.
This one, I wasn't sure if this was in the movie, and I might have missed something, but supposedly if you have a stick or a piece of wood made from a peach tree, that can defeat the evil spirits. Now, remember there was a point in the movie where what's his name, Master Cow had this sort of like almost like a dagger, but it was bigger than a dagger, and it would like light up with this cheesy '80s effect. I wonder if that was it. Did I miss something?
That it looked like it was okay. It looked like it's a wooden Tai Chi sword, and what I'm assuming is he's got some sort of Taoist powered Tai Chi. Tai Chi being a very Taoist martial art
Right.
in style and philosophy. So a lot of this is based on Taoist superstitions, which apparently are almost alien to us because we see stuff like sticky rice or
Yeah.
the little blood freezing them, and the little talismans they would put on their heads to keep them still, and the ringing of the bells to command them because they cannot. These vampires supposedly cannot see; they only go by breath.
Right.
And hearing. They hear your heartbeat or your breathing, and which leads to some really, really ingenious slapstick comedy in this film.
Yeah. I'm going to skip a bunch of these ones because it's not really relevant, but there was one thing they used was they would have thread, and it would be dyed or stained with this concoction they made that was a combination of black ink, chicken blood, and burnt talisman.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of cool because it had this sort of. I thought they were going to garrote a vampire every so often because it looked like that was going to happen, but instead it was more like the vampires touching an electrified fence.
Yeah, it's more spectacular because then you can have a stuntman fly back and do a flip or whatever, and because that's what the audiences want to see. They want to see that physical action and energy. So they give themselves a lot of gimmicks to work with for suspense angles and action angles. Particularly in the various sequels and follow-ups and everything. I don't know how much of it they invented for this film because, for years we thought a lot of the werewolf mythology was centuries old, and it turns out it was just a screenwriter or the Wolfman making it up.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say, oh, this is what they really believe, because I think a lot of this stuff was probably invented for the film just to make it more fun.
Right, right.
Yeah, and that's what I think it is. I'm not sure if they're even portrayed as very threatening in old Chinese literature and movies.
Right.
It's almost like how here in America our mythology of the zombie used to be they were workers. That was the Haitian voodoo idea of the zombie. They weren't like these flesh-eating monsters. They were just kind of like brain-dead workers, and now that's totally changed. You couldn't even tell. You couldn't tell people about Plague of the Zombies or the Zombies of Moratau or whatever the film is called. It's like you can't even get by with that because the mythology's been changed. You can't probably do a werewolf movie the way werewolf mythology was done in the 19th century. You have to follow the Universal Studios Lon Chaney Jr. werewolf. You have to be the Wolfman.
Exactly.
Silver bullets and full moons and all that stuff.
No, and it's funny too. There was one thing I had read, and it's they used a lot of rice in this movie, and I was surprised after having seen the film and then reading up on the Chinese mythologies that they and I've heard this before about other kinds of cryptids which is if you throw like a handful of coins or a handful of rice on the ground, they have no choice. It's almost like OCD. They have to stop and count each and every grain of rice or every coin, and that's a way you can get away from the monster, is by doing that to them. They surprisingly didn't do that in this movie. I don't know if maybe it would have just been boring watching a vampire on his hands and knees counting rice.
I think you've got the answer there.
Yeah.
I think the boredom factor, to have these OCD creatures, it just wouldn't have been all that fascinating. You can't get a lot of stunt work out of that, I think.
And I just thought of something because the term hopping vampire popped up in my notes, and for some reason, I thought this movie had a little kid hopping vampire in it, but that must be a different film. Does that ring a bell at all?
I think it's in Mr. Vampire 2.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And there's a series of films that were directed by Yin Wu Ping during his kind of in-between period where he was just kind of doing comedies and horror stuff. And it's an entire series. I think it's called Happy Ghost. And I think those are always about kid vampires. In fact, the kid vampire movies were like a subgenre of their own, where because kids love Mr. Vampire, I guess, in the various Asian movie circuits, and so they just made a bunch of kiddie vampire films, So,
right.
Hey, kids would go see them. So I couldn't imagine. I guess we've done it with the little vampire type of movies, but they really went full force with it. It was a vibrant subgenre that must have made money because there's sequels to the Happy Ghost films.
Wow, that's funny. I love finding new genres that I've never heard of and subgenres.
Yeah, and it's funny because as fanatical as I am for Hong Kong movies from this era, I realized just about a year ago how many of these I've never seen, because there was just tons of them. There were so many, and back in the 80s and 90s, I favored, mostly the martial arts action stuff and sometimes the gun action stuff like John Woo. And this stuff wasn't as easily available. And there wasn't as much fan interest in it. So it was tougher to get copies of these things, unless you live next to a Chinatown video rental place. And my friends who did, of course, they watched all of these damn things. Hey, I saw the Spooky Family. I saw the Happy Ghost 4, whatever. And now that they're getting re-released on Blu-ray and DVD in Hong Kong / China, I'm getting to rediscover them, and I'm really enjoying that because there's a sense of seeing all these movies you never saw before. It feels new. It's like, hey, I may not like what's in the theaters, but at least these old movies I've never seen before that are pretty interesting are getting released. So I'm very happy to start exploring the Hong Kong ghost cinema again, or the vampire comedies.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember my son a couple years ago basically said to me, referring to the East Meets the West podcast that I do, he's like, well, you're probably just about done with those, right? I'm like, oh no. There's like upwards of 600 or 700 Shaw Brothers movies and spaghetti westerns. He's like, oh, really?
Yeah. It's like there's too much to explore. And I like with spaghetti westerns, I've noticed a lot of the fandom will only stick with like the Eastwoods, the Djangos, and your basics. But there's so many more, and they got into so many crazy ideas. And it's the same way with the Chinese vampire films. They work so many different gimmicks of them. It's crazy.
Right.
It's just, it's phenomenal that, I really miss having this type of vibrant movie boom of different genres, because you could watch something new every week, and even what would be considered the mediocre B movie was still more fun than what is an A movie now,
Right.
It's just, it's that kind of fun, and you didn't have to watch the same film twice in a year. I mean, you could see something new every week that was interesting, or at least watchable or fun. It's really miss that. I think a lot of the enthusiasm has gone out of filmmaking in recent years. And it's the same in Hong Kong and China. China has never picked up that energy at all. It's like Hong Kong, they quit making this type of stuff around 92. And ever since then, it's just never been the same.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things about the way they stop the vampires in this movie, and it's kind of similar to when we did Kung Fu Zombie, and in my research, I found that the Chinese vampire is a lot more like a zombie than an actual blood-sucking, Western European vampire. And one of the major ways that they can stop them, which we also saw in the other film there, was I always like to call them Post-it notes, but you basically take a yellow piece of paper and there's like talismans written on it and stick it on their forehead, and that immobilizes the vampire.
Right.
And the other thing that was new to me, at least in this movie, at least this go around, because I didn't remember it from seeing it before, is the two guys, Cow and his buddy there, they bite the tips of their fingers to draw blood, and then they just literally touch the fingertips and put a little blood on the forehead of the vampires, and that also immobilizes them, which I thought that was a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah. It's better than having them count rice or coins, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. When the reality isn't visually exciting, invent something more fun. And these are probably all parts of Taoist mythology, which I've never really looked into, but I think unfortunately I passed up a chance at buying one book that was a complete guide to all the symbols and traditions of Taoism, and I was like, oh man, I should have picked that up because it probably was fascinating to read.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And another thing,
definitely would enhance the viewing of these films.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know, I'm doing the same thing. I'm like, geez, I wish I had done more research, well in advance. But next time around, one thing too that you could, a way of getting away from the vampire is to hold your breath, because apparently these ones are blind. Although, wasn't it the one, the real powerful one at the end of the movie? He could actually see, and that kind of shocked the main characters.
Yeah, he was the surprise. He was more like a Western vampire. He was kind of like those monstrous vampires in Blackula.
Right.
That I think that's what inspired Salem's Lot, at least the TV movies or the TV miniseries, because it's kind of the monster vampire that isn't talking. He's just roaring and aggressively, aggressively powerful, I guess would be a description for it. But yeah, obviously they needed a different threat in the finale that would give Chen Shu Ho an excuse to do his acrobatics, and Lim Chen Ying could do cool stuff, and you get the crazy bumps and crazy stunts, and I think that's the real reason that he's all powerful like that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. One thing that added to the comedy too was something else I read in the mythology of the vampires, is that one way to defeat them is to suck the creature's dying breath out of it. And they attempted that to great comedic value because it didn't work at all.
Right. I thought that was terrific. And that shows that they're more interested in constantly having something entertaining on the screen. Like
right.
There's no, you watch these movies, there's no long shots of streets. There's no, now, like we now see drone shots of the countryside or anything. You're always looking at something happening, something bizarre, interesting, and how they come up with these gags, it's really something else. And I think that's what helps when you have the different writers coming up with different jokes to kind of keep everything fresh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I almost wonder too, did you get the impression, I mean, you've seen a lot more of these than I have, that the filmmakers, they knew that a hopping vampire is kind of silly, so they use that to their advantage. At least that's the impression I got.
Yeah, definitely. They knew that you had to give the audience a bit more, and I think it's odd when you think about it, but for a decade they had all these films where they seem to move the Overton window with every film, like in terms of just piling on the action and piling on the suspense and just really giving the audience a roller coaster ride. And I wonder, maybe Raiders of the Lost Ark was a huge hit in Hong Kong. I'm sure it was. And I think they just all admired Spielberg so much they wanted to show that they could outdo it, or it gave them a challenge to say, hey, let's see if we can do something on our budgets that'll just give you this breakneck speed. I mean, you look at Temple of Doom. And Temple of Doom is considered to be, a lot of fans don't like it or whatever. I think it's actually the best of the Indiana Jones movies. And because it's just nonstop, in your face roller coaster ride, logic be damned. And then you read the behind the scenes and it's like Spielberg and Lucas were both getting divorced when they made that movie. And I was like, gee, they need to get divorced more often because their movies rock when they're under a lot of stress. Because it's just like, man. But I feel like every Hong Kong film from that era, they're working with that idea. What can we do next to just completely blow the audience away? And you don't see that in movies today. You don't see that type of enthusiasm. And that's what I feel when I watch this movie. It's like unpretentious. They're just going to pile it on and see if you can handle it. And their audience could handle this stuff. Because if you think about Hong Kong, they're going to be on their cell phone while they're reading a newspaper and listening to a radio broadcast while catching a train. That's kind of it was a very multitasking lifestyle in the 80s and 90s in Hong Kong. It's like just crazy. And I think the movies can kind of reflect that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. So I just wanted to give a quick, just a real brief historical background on this because I was watching it and I was trying to figure out when it took place. And like I read at the beginning, when I found the synopsis of the film, it said it took place in the Republic era. So I looked that up, and that was basically between 1912 and 1949, where I guess China was a sovereign state, the Republic of China was a sovereign state recognized as the official designation of China when it was based on mainland China prior to the relocation of its central government to Taiwan as a result of the Chinese Civil War. So by my estimation, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, I figured this movie took place in the 1930s.
It would be probably right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I know that time period is not important to them. I know
Right.
Chang Cheh did not care if his Shaolin movies were historically accurate. He did not care at all. Like, that's why they don't have shaved heads in a lot of his Shaolin films. They have the long queues, the long hair and everything. And he didn't care if costumes were accurate because he figures the audience doesn't care. And I think with this, it could be 1930s, it could be 1915, but it all kind of fits because it doesn't really matter because they didn't care. It's
Right.
like, hey, you know what era this takes place in. We don't need to beat you over the head and show you a newspaper and show you a billboard with King Kong on the movie marquee or anything like that.
Right.
Because American movies, like and I guess British films do it too, where they always have to call attention to the year. Hey, The Godfather 2 is opening next week. Okay, this came out. This is set in 1973.
Right.
Hey, Jaws is opening next week. Okay, it's 75. Hey, car. It's like over there they don't care. It's like what era it takes place in, so we don't really have to beat you over the head with anything.
Right. Oh my God. Yeah, and that always confuses me and my co-host Pat on the East Meets the West when we're watching a Shaw Brothers film and then someone's got like a Luger or even a car, or even in like a spaghetti western when they're driving vehicles. I forget which one it was that we were watching, and I was like, wait a minute. It took me halfway through the movie to realize they were cars. I'm like, I thought this was the Old West,
Well, it's like my friend Eric Zaldivar, who I consider basically a spaghetti western scientist. And we've had him on Midnight Movie Cowboys frequently whenever we talk spaghetti westerns. And Zaldivar said, if you use accurate time, period pieces where you're trying to figure out where all these westerns are set, it's like you would have to accept by the guns and technology that it's 1883 or it's 1890 because they're always using guns that were not available until those years, or
Right.
like it'll be set it'll be set during the Civil War and they've got a Colt pistols that were not invented until 20 years later. So he's like, you just can't even nail down a time period for these things.
Yeah.
And the Italians more than likely just didn't care.
They didn't care, yeah.
We talked about the Italians before on the show, but they didn't care.
I thought it was funny how what was it? I think it was Master Cow and one of his students, the second one. They didn't know how to drink coffee.
Yeah. That's kind of they love to get that. I've noticed something more as I get older when I watch these, appreciating more in these scenes where there's sort of boy, Western stuff is really alien.
Yeah.
Coffee. What is this coffee? Oh, why do women wear skirts like this and high heels? It's a sort of like if you watch the movie My Young Auntie, the Shaw Brothers film, that's all about the Westernization of China and how the characters aren't really responding well to it.
Right. Yeah, I could tell that because they get served a cup of black coffee and then the cream is on the side. And so do you think the girl Ting was messing with them because she takes a sip of the coffee and then takes a sip of the cream, and then Choi does the same thing? But then
either she was messing with him. It wasn't clear to me. Either she was messing with him or she didn't know herself.
And
she was thinking she could,
Yeah, because then she later puts the cream and sugar into the coffee. And then
she was trolling him then. She was trolling him in 1935 China.
Because then he's putting cream and sugar on his desserts.
Yeah. And there is that sort of westernization thing that's always, because in Hong Kong a lot of their schooling is based on the British school system, or it was, and I think there's always a lot of that kind of hidden ethnic comedy or whatever or class comedy in their movies. And the big influence on Hong Kong comedic films is the stuff from England, like the Carry On movies. Right. They love that stuff. And they love the French movies. They like Jacques Tati and all these French comedians. They like Jerry Lewis. They like Western comedy, so they try to imply their own version of it, I think, in a way.
Right. There was so much good comedy in this. Like, there's a scene where, at first when they meet Ting, or actually, it might have been the second time, I'm not sure. She goes into the store, and what's his name? I can't remember. Choi's buddy there is running the store, and he thinks she's a prostitute because the older lady came in and said, "Oh, there's a customer coming in. She's a prostitute." And so they're having this conversation where he's thinking she's a prostitute and she's looking for cosmetics. And it's this hilarious conversation because they both have no idea that the other is completely misinterpreting what they're saying.
They like their prostitute jokes, and they like their classy women versus prostitution gags all the time. There's a lot of those in there, but what Chinese humor is, they're very much based on wordplay more than people would think, and or I guess maybe it's Cantonese humor, and it works really well. But I also think that's one reason. Like, I watched the English dub version this time. Does not work well for me at all. And usually I have no problem with English dubbing, but the dubbing on this, I think Chinese comedy is so tough to translate into English dubbing. You're better off with the subtitles and listening to it in Cantonese.
Yeah, I agree.
And I really think it just works better because you cannot capture a lot of that in a mouth movement. And I don't think the dubbers over there were capable of capturing that kind of that comedy in their performance, that sort of subtle comedy. But I noticed that this time is like, okay, usually I'm in favor of English dubbing, but with Cantonese comedy, you can't do it. You have to watch it in Cantonese with subtitles and hopefully some decent subtitle translations.
Right. And it's funny because I was thinking about something similar recently. My grandson's 5, and he really loves the black and white Popeye cartoons. They're on Amazon Prime right now. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's great. We even tried watching a color one. He's like, I don't like this one. I want the black and white one. And in those, if you recall, Popeye's constantly muttering under his breath. And I remember thinking, I don't know if that would translate well in other countries, in other languages, I should say.
Right, because I think it was assumed that he's cursing.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I watch everything with subtitles, and you can actually see what he's saying, and he's just muttering about what's going on. It's nothing really relevant. Yeah. I'll show you what.
Well, Fred Flintstone did that, I think. I haven't watched Flintstones in decades, but
that's right. Yeah.
I think Fred Flintstone used to mutter under his breath, grouching.
Yeah,
and I think it's just a common comedic thing. But yeah, kids like black and white comedy. I've noticed my son liked Three Stooges and and different comedy they showed him. It's like kids don't have a problem with black and white. It's like when they become teenagers, maybe a little impatient with things, then they have black and white.
Yeah.
It's just black and white. Oh, that's old. I don't want to watch that. But even when I was a kid, I loved black and white comedy. And it's like Abbott and Costello, I just thought were great.
Oh, yeah. And Laurel and Hardy, I loved all those.
Yeah. It's like, and I could still just pop in a Blu-ray or DVD of those and just laugh my head off.
Right. So there was one scene in this movie I didn't quite get, and maybe you can explain it to me, but there was a character that comes across this sort of ghostly funeral procession. What was
Mhm.
that all about? It seems sort of out of left field.
I'm trying to remember the character. You talking about the ghost that tried to seduce the guy?
It was prior to that, I believe. I think it was him walking through the woods, and there was just these ghosts in the middle of a funeral procession, and then like nothing happened. They just then walked away.
I think they are ghosts from the Chinese mythology or the legends that I have that book, Strange Stories from a Chinese store or something. I forget what the title is, but I have the Penguin Classics edition, and I've not read it yet. And apparently, all of that stuff that we see in these films is explained in there.
Oh, okay.
All of those stories are in there, so I think they're kind of like they're famous characters from Chinese mythology or ghost legends that we just don't know. You know,
Yeah.
it's like trying to explain Spider-Man to the Chinese have never seen it or something. It's just kind of like, or Black Bart or Popeye. You know, it's just like if you're trying to explain something that they take it for granted, so they can throw that in their movie, and we were just completely, what the hell is this? Like, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing, and I wouldn't actually, for myself, for my own purposes, I would not classify this as a completely batshit crazy movie, but there's a lot of great stuff in this. And just like when the ghost chick just goes full on demonic and her head pops off, and I mean that was some scary shit.
yeah, it's really well done. That's where to me that's sort of like just jamming everything in there to make it entertaining.
Right.
It's just like different subplots, different creatures, and American films aren't paced that way. They're not structured that way, and they just want to keep you entertained. So they have something for everybody, and they have this comedy, they have this action, then they have this horror stuff that's really well done, and it's just to keep the movie going and to keep you having fun, not to alienate you or tick you off or anything. It's very much a 1940s B movie attitude, but updated for 80s Hong Kong in color, and for what is really, I think, was an A picture by Hong Kong standards.
Oh yeah, and that makes me think. We were talking earlier about how most modern films aren't as enjoyable as these kind of films, but there was one that came out probably like 6 or 8 months ago. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called *Malignant*.
I haven't seen it. I've heard of it because I think it was a big deal for a few weeks.
I highly recommend it. It's one of those movies that all of a sudden it becomes batshit crazy, and that's when it won me over. And it's like I remember afterwards thinking, I wish they could make more movies like this, like they used to, because it's very much in the vein of just, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? This is insane.
Right. Well, have you ever shown like Evil Dead 2 to people expecting like a Friday the 13th type of film?
Yeah.
And they look at you like you're crazy. This happened to me in the 80s. But they look at you like you're crazy. Like, why are you showing this? This is silly. This isn't a horror film. It's like they cannot handle that type of energy or that kind of bending of the rules in a genre. They want the guy in the hockey mask and the dumb girls, walking into a room and not flipping on a light switch. They need that sort of stupidity and predictability. It's like, but meanwhile, I'd rather have what's in Evil Dead 2 with the hillbilly girl swallowing an eyeball that flies into her mouth. It's just like by the time we got to that scene, they didn't know what the hell I had written for them to watch. They're like, what is going on with you? Why did you rent this?
Yeah.
They don't appreciate that type of, hey, we're going to do anything to entertain you. And I think that's what a lot of people liked about Sam Raimi movies. To me, were like a weekly occurrence in Hong Kong cinema. So it's just that type of energy and need to entertain. And by the way, I do not think Sam Raimi has come close to that type of stuff in this century. It's like for the positives of some of his movies he's made in the last 2 decades, he's not the same filmmaker.
Yeah. I think he's evolved as a filmmaker, but I also think he's kind of at the whim of the corporate.
Right. He's evolved into the type of filmmaker I didn't want him.
Right.
Yeah, he's a competent craftsman, but I like the Sam Raimi of Crime Wave and Evil Dead 2. That's what I want.
Yeah.
That's what blows me away. That stuff knocks me out.
I think what Sam, and this is a whole other topic for another show, but I think like Sam Raimi will do the big budget films, probably for the paycheck and probably because he likes the material, but then he'll go and do a much smaller film like a Drag Me to Hell kind of thing.
Yeah, I didn't like Drag Me to Hell, but I did like A Simple Plan.
Yes, yeah. With Bill Paxton, right?
And people forgot he made A Simple Plan, but I really enjoyed that movie. I thought maybe he would do more stuff like that, like do a crime drama like that he seemed to have a good affinity for it. Never saw his baseball movie. Maybe that's good. I don't know.
Oh, I never saw. I didn't even know he made a baseball movie.
I think he made a baseball movie with like Kevin Costner. I guess everybody does sooner or later.
Oh, that's
but For the Love of the Game or something like that. You know, they all have the same predictable titles. I just don't see them. But I guess being Sam Raimi, he had point of view of the baseball flying around. So
smacking into somebody's head.
Right. That's what I want. That's the Sam Raimi baseball film I want to see.
Oh man! So there's a lot of great little touches in this movie, like the Master has this device that looks like a compass, and it helps him track vampires, although it doesn't really work all that well.
Right.
And then there's a hilarious scene where Harry's trying to file Dan's teeth down. The fangs.
I remember that. Yeah, great stuff. Very Ricky Hoy comedy right there.
And there was one thing that made me think of Bud Spencer when the final vampire there, the big bad, as all the group of vampires on him, because the Master's buddy was controlling them, and they all pile on him, and he does the Bud Spencer way, like the Incredible Hulk, where he just flips them all away.
Yeah, because the Bud Spencer movies were big there. I'm sure the Spencer and Hill films were even bigger. And you'll definitely Bud Spencer worked in Hong Kong with those stunt crews for Flatfoot in Hong Kong. So yeah, it was definitely a Bud Spencer inspired scene.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to bring up is that there's a great man on fire scene in this movie, which you always hear about the ones from American films, but this went on for quite a while, and they threw more shit on him to make the fire increase.
Yes. Only in Hong Kong, where they probably have no regulation
right
for the way they do this, and I just hope the guy didn't get burned, because I don't want to think that I've enjoyed this thing and this whoever was in that costume got serious injuries.
That's hilarious. So, in wrapping this up, John, what are your final thoughts on Mr. Vampire?
Yes. It's a great film. It's a classic. I would rate it like a 4-star film. I think it's one of the, if you had to pick 10 Hong Kong movies to watch to understand why people love this cinema, this is definitely would be in that top 10. It's not in my top 10 favorite of all time, but it's definitely in the top 10. Hey, this is what it's all about.
Absolutely. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed this film. I liked it even more this time around.
Right. And I have one interesting follow-up to this is that Golden Harvest attempted an English language version with American actors and stopped filming after like 3 weeks. And in the cast was Jack Scalia, Tanya Roberts, who was fired and then replaced with Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. And Michelle Phillips is apparently very, very willing to work in this film. She was very enthusiastic about it. Yun Hua was playing the priest instead of Lam Jingying, but apparently and Ricky Lau was directing. And apparently they had so many issues because Jack Scalia was frustrated working with Hong Kong actors who couldn't speak English very well, so he couldn't really act with them. And I guess he was impatient. But apparently Michelle Phillips was a sweetheart on the set. But Raymond Chow looked at the footage and he said, there's no reason to continue this. But I believe they were going to call it Phantom Fighter because there was a popular Nintendo game based on Mr. Vampire called Phantom Fighters. And they were going to call it like Phantom Fighter, the movie. However, there's also talk that it was titled Demon Hunter. It doesn't really matter. It was never finished and was shelved. And to this day, no one has seen the footage. And I know people in Hong Kong who know guys who worked at Golden Harvest. They will not talk about this film. Like producer David Chan, no relation to Jackie. He produced all the major Golden Harvest movies in the 80s. He will not speak about that incident of filming Phantom Fighter or Demon Hunter, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, wow.
They will not. Apparently, it was just one of those, we talk about how the Batgirl movie got shelved. This has happened more often than people realize.
Yeah.
They will start filming something, and in a month, if it's just not gelling, if it's a difficult shoot, forget it. unplug the production. But this was going to be an attempt to do a Mr. Vampire for North America and Europe and try to get it into theaters and everything, and it just didn't work out.
Oh my God.
I would love to see the footage though. Just the masochist in me wants to see it.
Right.
Just to see what they were attempting. I find it fascinating. Unfinished films are very fascinating to me.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, this movie, the production value was great. The film just overall looks great. The action was incredible. The comedy was hilarious throughout. Like with the exception of, like I said, that one scene of the ghostly funeral procession, there wasn't anything in this that I didn't really get. Like I said, it would have been nice to see Chiang Shang in that role, although I can see why he's not. But what would have been really cool, and I wish they had done it, I think on East Meets the West, we covered the film Heaven and Hell, which we did not really particularly care for. I think part of it was we didn't really get it. But I would have liked to have seen the Venom mob in a horror film like this. Like the Venoms going up against these vampires would have been awesome.
Yeah, and those guys were kind of done in Hong Kong by the time these films came about. And Chang Che didn't want to do that type of movie. I mean, he made one like that, Attack of the Joyful Goddess. And I think that has a couple of the Venoms in it. And Chang Ching might be in it. It's been a while since I've seen it. But that is probably the closest Chang Che came to making something like that.
Yeah.
But Shaw Brothers kind of done by then. They didn't really want to move into the, doing the vampire films and such. And they were kind of done with producing movies. But Golden Harvest had kind of taken over to where their stuff was being released in Shaw theaters. So the guys who were willing to go work over at Golden Harvest, like Chin Soo Ho, basically he took that bus from Shaw Brothers to Golden Harvest and made Golden Harvest movies. And because he had starred in some of he was in Chang Che's Two Champions of Shaolin, and he was also in Holy Flame of the Martial World, which is a really fun, crazy film with a lot of supernatural stuff. But he made that switch to Golden Harvest pretty well. Lo Mang, I think, tried to do some movies at Golden Harvest, but didn't work out for him.
Right.
And the other guys were Taiwanese, so I think they just went back to Taiwan and made movies there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They were never accepted as stars in Hong Kong, I think. They were just kind of like, probably because they were Taiwanese.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've read that about like Philip Kwok and stuff.
Yeah, and we don't realize that they can be very I'm not sure what the word is. It would be the city version of tribalism, but it's like, hey, we don't want Taiwanese stars here in Hong Kong. We have more Hong Kong stars. They can speak their lousy Mandarin. We like our Cantonese, whatever.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been awesome. Thank you for joining me on this discussion of Mr. Vampire.
Sure. It's always a blast.
Can you tell the listeners where they can find you online?
www.midnightmoviecowboys.com should get you there. And you can also find us on YouTube. Just do a search for Midnight Movie Cowboys, and our channel will come up.
Excellent. Now, are those videos that you're doing, or is it just
we are doing
audio?
videos. We are actually doing video podcasts now. I was a little against it, but because I don't like being seen on camera, but I've had to get used to it, and it's worked out okay for us. And I mean, it's only really useful for Whip Out Your Junk, which is our segment where we show what we bought that week. So
that's awesome.
So if you want to see our junk get whipped out, go to the YouTube channel. But I think the audio version is fine. I personally prefer podcasts on audio. I'll go to the gym. I'll listen to a podcast on the elliptical or treadmill or whatever the hell, machine. But I prefer podcast audio, but some people wanted video. They got it. We give you that option, but you can do either one. I don't care.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, John, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Sure. Always a blast.
Okay, folks, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Thank you for joining us for our special 2022 13 Days of Hallowtober event, in which we're discussing vampire films this year. I just want to briefly remind you that we've got a live streaming monthly series called The Fright Lounge, in which we discuss all horror media for seasoned horror fans, as well as those of you who don't know if you want to get into horror. We've also got a new podcast called The Cult Movie Lounge, in which award-winning blogger Robert Manell and I discuss all cult movies all the time. And there's, of course, our sister show, The East Meets the West, in which we discuss Shaw Brothers films and spaghetti western movies, all of which can be found at our website, Haven Podcasts, that's plural, havenpodcasts.com. And while you're at our website, be sure to click on our Patreon link and TeePublic link to help support the show. We've also got a YouTube page, so please go to youtube.com/user/UncleDeath1 and subscribe to it. And don't forget to hit that little bell so you get notifications when we put out new episodes. And of course, we want your feedback, so please email us at thenisnow42@gmail.com. And you can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group as well. Then Is Now podcast is part of the Dorkening Podcast Network, so please check out the other great shows there at thedorkeningpodcastnetwork.com. That's right, folks, and all of those links, like I said, they're on our website as well as in our show notes of every episode, and we are on all the podcasting apps. So if you like our show, please go to wherever you download your podcast from and leave us a great review, because that bumps us up the list in the algorithm and helps more people to find us. Thank you for joining us today. Class dismissed.
Then Is Now podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Sounds, music, and clips played during this podcast are the property of their copyright holders. All original content is copyright Jupiter Media.
For more shows like the one you just heard, check out the Dorkening Podcast Network at thedorkening.com.